You know that feeling when you wake up on a Tuesday morning and the silence in your house feels so heavy it might crush you? When your phone hasn't rung in 3 days, and you catch yourself having full conversations with the TV just to hear another voice? When you're surrounded by 40 years of memories but nobody left to share them with? If you're nodding right now, this story is for you, because what I'm about to tell you changed everything for a woman who thought her best days were behind her. Meet Margaret, 68 years old, retired teacher, widow of 2 years. She'd spent her whole life caring for everyone else, her students, her husband, her aging parents. Now, for the first time in decades, she was completely alone. The house that once buzzed with life felt like a mausoleum. Her grown kids called once a week, but they were busy with their own families, their own problems. Margaret would sit in her kitchen every morning, coffee growing cold, wondering if this was it, if this crushing loneliness was what the rest of her life looked like. You see, nobody prepares you for the loneliness of retirement. Society celebrates your freedom, your well-deserved rest, but nobody talks about the deafening quiet that follows. Margaret told me she'd stand at her living room window, watching neighbors come and go, feeling invisible, like she was disappearing a little more each day. But here's where Margaret's story takes a turn that'll surprise you. One particularly rough Thursday, she was walking past the community center she'd driven by 1,000 times. There was a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Knitting Circle, Beginners Welcome." Now, Margaret hadn't touched knitting needles since high school, but something about that word, beginners, spoke to her. She thought, maybe I can be a beginner again. Walking through those doors was terrifying. Her hands shook as she introduced herself to a room full of strangers, but something magical happened. Within minutes, she was laughing at her tangled yarn while a woman named Rose patiently untangled her mistakes. By the end of that first session, she'd learned something profound. Loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about feeling disconnected from purpose and people. Margaret didn't just find knitting that day, she found her tribe. Rose became her coffee companion. Frank, the only man in the group, turned out to be a retired veteran with the best stories she'd ever heard. Linda, the group organizer, convinced Margaret to help teach beginners. Suddenly, Margaret wasn't just taking up space in the world, she was needed again. But here's the real breakthrough. Margaret realized that waiting for connection to happen to her was like waiting for rain in the desert. She had to create her own weather, so she started small, smiling at cashiers, striking up conversations in grocery store lines. She volunteered at the library's literacy program, using her teaching background to help adults learn to read. Each connection, no matter how brief, added color back to her world. 6 months later, Margaret's calendar was fuller than it had been in years. Not with empty activities, but with meaningful connections. She was teaching knitting, mentoring new volunteers, and had even started dating a gentleman she met at the library. But the most beautiful part? She'd become the person reaching out to other lonely souls, being the light she'd once desperately needed. Margaret learned what researchers have proven. Loneliness is a signal, not a sentence. It's your heart telling you that connection matters, that you matter. The antidote isn't just finding people, it's finding your place among them, your way to contribute, your reason to matter again. Your retirement years aren't the epilogue of your story, they're a whole new chapter waiting to be written. And that chapter can be filled with laughter, purpose, and connections deeper than you ever imagined. Sometimes all it takes is walking through one door, being brave for just one moment, and remembering that you're never too old to begin again. The loneliness you feel today doesn't define your tomorrow. Your best connections, your deepest friendships, your most meaningful moments might still be waiting for you just beyond your comfort zone. Margaret proved it, and so can you.